You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking to Dan Gainor, who is the director of the Business and Media Institute, which is a free market think tank operating under another organization called the Media Research Center, which also operates Newsbusters. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be on one of my favorite places.
I'd like to start on a topic that you really write about a lot, which is George Soros. Before we get into the details, could you explain why, other than being a rich guy, why is he so important?
Well, I mean, George Soros isn't just a rich guy. I mean, he's, I think, the 22nd richest man on the entire planet, according to the latest Forbes list. And that means whatever he does tends to have a big impact. He's had a very controversial career where he's done a lot of things that have, kind of antagonized people. Even the way he's made some of his money, shorting the British pound, making $1 billion on that. Tends to antagonize people. But the biggest issue about George Soros, oddly enough, is his philanthropy. He's given $8.5 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, to his Open Societies foundations. And through those foundations has had an enormous impact on countries that are trying to sometimes democratize, sometimes revolt against existing leadership. He's insinuated himself into the local politics of, frankly, many nations. Probably, his number, he would say more than 70. I'm pretty sure he probably had more impact than that. And of late, the biggest impact since early 2000s has been in America.
Mm-hmm. So he's trying to bring democracy to a number of countries?
Well, sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I say sometimes. His efforts against the old Soviet Union, I think you could say were pretty good. I think he has, even in those, I think he has an agenda. But still, fighting the power when the power is a communist dictatorship, I have no problems with. Mm-hmm. But what's happened over time is I think he's gotten a taste for influencing, the fight the power kind of attitude. His Open Society foundations have been linked to, in some cases, the stuff going on in the Arab Spring. And they've been linked to various movements in the United States, up to and including the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Okay, so being involved and having an agenda is something that, frankly, all of us have. Is there something wrong with his agenda?
Well, when you spend $8.5 billion influencing that agenda, and you're pushing what tends to be viewed, I think, by not just many, but most people, some of it is very radical. I've spent off and on, I've read all of George Soros's books, and believe me, that's a mitzvah. Because some of them are really, really boring.
Oh no!
But I've read all those. I've read tons of things he's written, and I've tried to figure out what his agenda is. And a couple months ago, I had sort of kind of a brainstorm that what it seemed to be he was getting at, and it's disturbing. At one point in one of his books, he talks about famous utopias people have written about, up to and including Utopia. Whether it's A Brave New World or different, or 1984, futures that people have written about. And when I was reading this and reading all the things that he supports, it became kind of obvious to me that what he's funding is what you would find mostly in the book Brave New World. The problem with that is Brave New World's intended as a satire. It's intended to look at a possible future and say, gee, isn't this awful? And then you look at what he's funding, and across the board, with the exception of his pro-gay agenda, which is one of the things he funds, the pro-abortion, anti-family, pro-big government, pro-drug, pro-a lot of things, agenda that he pushes, it can be found entirely within the pages of Brave New World. And that's when you look at all the stuff he's funding within the United States and around the world, and you look at that agenda, that's scary. I mean, that's just flat out scary to me.
Okay. We are talking to Dan Gainor, who is the director of the Business and Media Institute, which is part of the Media Research Center. He's done a lot of research and written a lot about George Soros. In your research on him, have you actually had the chance to talk with him?
No, I have not. I was hoping to go. They were speaking at one event in D.C. I was hoping to attend that, but life circumstances came up. He's a very smart man. He's not the kind of guy you're going to go and talk to or come out from the audience and throw the gotcha question at and actually get anywhere with it. Mm-hmm. I think where he's particularly smart is investing. One of the reasons why he literally went from, I think it was $14.5 to $20 billion in 1 year in his investments in the last year. You don't do that being an idiot. He has this concept of reflexive investing, where basically things that you do to invest in a product or a company or an industry can potentially impact that investment and come back to you. Since he's what you would easily call a market leader in investing, particularly this is important with him. So when he invests in gold, a lot of people follow his investment into gold.
So that would make sense, right? So from a personal finance standpoint, he's probably a reasonable guy to follow. But you've said things, for example.
You could also get burned doing that, and that's been one of the big complaints. But that he will make a big deal about his investment in the gold. A lot of people follow him, pushing up the price, and then he bails, leaving them all holding the bag. Mm-hmm. So you come in much later than he did at a price much higher, then he bails, and you're left with relatively no gain or possibly even a loss. That's the problem with that.
Okay. Other accusations or allegations you've made against him is that you've said he's helped to start revolutions and undermined national currencies, funding radicals around the world. Could you give us some examples of that?
Oh, well, first of all, that's not an allegation. That's him saying that. I mean, he says that. He's very open with one of his books. He claims at least 5 different revolutions he's helped support. Many of those in the old Soviet Union. He has been much cagier about his support for the Arab Spring, although he's given it lip service. But if you remember, a little while back, there were a couple hikers arrested in Iran.
Sure.
One of those was an Open Society Institute employee.
Okay.
And some of the other people connected to Arab Spring have had either training or various connections to Open Society foundations. So he's got widespread reach into that movement. At the same time, he funded both Adbusters, which was the origin of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which openly declares itself as a global revolutionary movement. And he's funded the people who handled their finances for Occupy Wall Street.
Well, it seems for all the money that he gave, they didn't actually... has Wall Street changed? I'm still buying and selling stocks every day.
Well, the Occupy Wall Street movement, if you're familiar with that. The protest movement going around trying to attack and protest against Wall Street.
I understand, but the effect that they've had on people who work on Wall Street...
In this country, they've actually had a pretty widespread media impact. They've gotten, enormous media support from the old school media, the networks and major print outlets. The Washington Post writes periodic love letters to the Occupy Wall Street movement and puts them on the front page, including stories about dating among the Occupy Wall Street people. It's pretty ridiculous. So that money, while it hasn't been huge, it went into activist groups that you get much more much bigger bang for your buck by doing that.
So again, you're just pointing out that he's putting money into areas that perhaps you may not agree with, but these are legitimate. I don't necessarily even want to call them revolutions, but even the Occupy Wall Street was just a real political statement because people were very unhappy with the current system.
Well, but I mean, well, like I said, and again, he also has been accused globally, and I mean in many countries, of undermining currencies, again, which is probably legal. He has, of course, he got an administrative ruling against him for insider trading in France that resulted in a $3 million fine. Mm-hmm. He was fined in Hungary for $2 million, which is important to note since he's from Hungary, and when you're getting fined in your home country, that's bad. He's had, at one point, the Open Society Foundation in Russia, in Moscow, was chased out of their offices in quite literally a paramilitary raid. Then seemingly, and I say seemingly, a counter-paramilitary raid failed to regain the offices. One must assume that the Open Society Foundations and Soros were supportive of the counter-paramilitary raid since they were intended to get the offices back. His name is pretty much persona non grata in a lot of countries. So to see the things he has done to undermine the established order in Soviet Union, in the Eastern Bloc, now in Arab Spring, and to see some of those same strategies playing out in democratic nations is very disturbing. Because while what he's doing may be legal, it still is a anti-government, anti-establishment move, and as such, people need to know about it.
So you think he's just sticking his nose in where it doesn't necessarily belong?
No, I think he got a taste for taking down established power structures and wants to continue doing so up to including the United States government. And that, speaking of we're in a democracy. The way to do that in a democracy is we have these things called elections, not where people march down the street, several thousand strong, calling for revolution. Mm-hmm. When you call for revolution, people generally end up getting hurt or dying. And when you do that in a dictatorship like the Soviet Union or like Egypt or wherever, I understand that. When you're doing that in a democracy, then you're going against the very democracy whose tools you're using for that protest.
I see. Okay, we have been talking to Dan Gainor, who is a political commentator. He's quite an expert on George Soros. Actually, his organization, the Business and Media Institute, also discusses a number of other topics, which I was hoping we would touch on today, but we're really just about out of time, including such things as global warming. I hope we'll have a chance to have you back, Dan. In the last couple of seconds, could you tell us how could people follow some of your work?
They can find us on one of two sites, mrc.org, and you can go to /BMI for Business and Media Institute, or you can find us at newsbusters.org.
All right. Dan Gainor, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.